Can the New York Knicks win the NBA championship this season? I think the answer is yes. Why? Because the New York Knicks in the Jalen Brunson era have never had a better roster than they do right now. They've never had a better starting five. They've never had a better bench. They haven't had a better coach in the Jalen Brunson era. No offense to Tom Thibodeau, but he does have one major coaching flaw, and that is he don't play his bench players, all right? He would rather run all his starters into the ground, and, he'd rather play Josh Hart 48 minutes than give anybody on the bench minutes except for, Mitchell Robinson. Coming into this season, the New York Knicks, I think they had championship expectations. I expected them to be competing for a championship. That wasn't necessarily a consensus opinion. A lot of people thought, hey, it's time for the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're going to run the East. It's time for them to win a championship. They're going to be contending. They're going to be in the finals. And, the Cavaliers have had a pretty rocky season. Now, the Knicks season has not been smooth at all right? They've had ups, they've had downs, and I could see why someone would think, yeah, the Knicks, they're not title contenders. The Knicks are not title contenders. But I think they are. And I have thought that pretty much all season, I think. Except, like in like the start of January, I'm like, oh, these guys are they're not playing real good right now. But let's go over the Knicks season. Coming into the season, I thought, hey, they got the best roster in the East. And now it is the All-Star break. And I still think that. I think their roster has gotten better. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So coming into the season, I thought they had the best roster in the East. Start the season off, they're playing pretty all right. Then it's time for the NBA Cup, and the Knicks win the whole thing. The Knicks win the NBA Cup. They beat the San Antonio Spurs in the finals, who had just beat the Oklahoma City Thunder. So that was a big deal that the Spurs beat the Thunder, and then they proceed to lose to the Knicks. And the Knicks, they win the NBA Cup. Everyone says, oh, the Knicks can finally raise a banner in Madison Square Garden. And then they didn't raise a banner for the NBA Cup. And then over the next month, they played pretty poor basketball. They played really poor basketball. They went 7-10. Now, it wasn't just because they played pretty poor basketball. They were dealing with some injuries. Josh Hart was dealing with injuries. Jalen Brunson was dealing with injuries. And Karl Anthony Towns, he was not playing spectacular. He was playing pretty poor, and this led to even Mike Brown calling him out in a post game interview. Saying, hey, he's got to give better effort. And then he was put in like some trade rumors. Hey, the Knicks, they might be trying to get rid of Karl Anthony Towns. People are like, hey, the Knicks could trade Cat for Giannis, and that didn't end up happening. But the Knicks did pick up their level of basketball play. They did start playing good again. Cat started playing good again. Jalen Brunson got healthy. Josh Hart, he's been healthier. They are the 3 seed right now. All right, at All-Star break, they are the 3 seed. They're 35-20. They are behind the Boston Celtics. They're behind the Detroit Pistons. The Knicks are 8-2 in their last 10, 21-7 at home, 13-13 on the road. They're third in offensive rating, 10th in defensive rating. They're playing pretty good basketball, all things considered. They have picked their level of basketball play back up. Okay, they're playing like a championship contending team once again. And at the trade deadline, they traded Gershon Yabusele to the Chicago Bulls for some guy I never heard of. Then they immediately traded that guy to the New Orleans Pelicans for Jose Alvarado, adding to their bench depth. And he has made a real good impact in the games that he's played. Jose Alvarado has played pretty good in the very few games he's played for the Knicks so far. And I think when the playoffs come around, Jose Alvarado is going to be a difference maker. He's going to make winning plays because that's what Jose Alvarado does. He just hasn't had a lot of opportunity to do that due to the fact he's been in New Orleans his whole career, and they don't really make the playoffs that often. The San Antonio Spurs released Jeremy Sohan from his contract, and the Knicks signed him. Now, Jeremy Sohan this season, he's only averaging 4 points per game, but he's fallen out of rotation with the San Antonio Spurs. When he was in rotation, he was averaging 11 points a game. He was playing pretty solid basketball. And now the Knicks have just added him. So in the last, in the last few weeks, they've added Jose Alvarado and Jeremy Sohan to their roster. for basically nothing. I mean, they gave up Gershon Yabusele, and he wasn't playing really good at all. So you look at the New York Knicks bench now, they have Jose Alvarado, Jordan Clarkson, Mohamed Diawara, Jeremy Sohan, Mitchell Robinson, Tyler Kolek, if they ever decide to play him again. I don't really know what happened. He played great on Christmas, and then he fell out of rotation after that. What happened there? And then you look at their starting five, and I think the Knicks have had the best starting five in the NBA. Not in the NBA, in the East. They've had the best starting five in the East for probably the last 2 seasons. Ever since they traded for Karl Anthony Towns, I have thought that they have the best starting 5. Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Karl Anthony Towns. Now, if the team is, relatively healthy for the remainder of the season, I think that they will probably win the most games in the Eastern Conference over the next 27, 28 games left in the season. All right, I don't think they'll end up the first seed, but I do think they will win the most games in the Eastern Conference in that time. And then when it comes to the playoffs, I think anything less than a conference finals appearance is disappointing for the Knicks. And I think it's also going to be a little bit disappointing if the Knicks make the conference finals but don't make it out of the conference finals. If they don't make an NBA finals appearance this season, I think there might be some big changes in the offseason, okay? They might trade Karl Anthony Towns. They might trade Mikal Bridges or OG Anunoby. I think that's a possibility. And it's certainly a possibility if they don't even make the conference finals. I think there's definitely going to be some big changes in the offseason if that's the case. But the Knicks, over the last, few seasons, before they had Jalen Brunson, they missed the playoffs. They signed Brunson. They make it to the second round. They're back in the second round the next season, but they get eliminated by the Pacers. Then last year in the playoffs, they make the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time in like 20 years, 25 years, something like that. And, if they won game 1, I think they might have actually won the series. But Tyrese Halliburton in the Garden, he hits that big shot. It wasn't a game winner, but it might as well have been because at that point the Knicks had no momentum going. They blew a 20-point lead in 3 minutes, and in overtime, did they score? I'm not sure. But, and then it kind of felt like after that, they weren't going to win the series, After that, it kind of felt like, all right, it's over for the Knicks. But I think they should make the Eastern Conference Finals again this season. All right? I think they should. If they don't, that'll be disappointing. And it'll also be a little disappointing if they don't make the finals. I think they are the best team in the Eastern Conference. I know the Celtics have a better record than them. I don't think the Celtics are going to be that spectacular in the playoffs. I'm not saying they're going to get swept in the first round, but I don't see them making a conference finals. All right. And, the Detroit Pistons also have a better record than the Knicks, but the Detroit Pistons are kind of a wild card. All right, they're the 1 seed, but every game I've seen of the Pistons this season, they've had someone get thrown out. Sometimes multiple people get thrown out off of their team, whether it be Isaiah Stewart or Jalen Duren or Ron Holland or sometimes JB Bickerstaff, the coach. Someone seemingly is always getting thrown out of these Pistons games, and you do that in the playoffs, which I think that will happen in the playoffs. Then I don't know. I don't think they're going to go that far. I don't think they're going to go that far. They could make an Eastern Conference Finals appearance. I'll say that, but I don't think they're going to be in the finals. I think it's going to either be the Knicks. It'll probably be the Knicks, or it could be the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now they get to the finals. They could be playing the OKC Thunder. They could be playing the San Antonio Spurs. They could be playing the Denver Nuggets. All very tough opponents to play in the finals. If any team in the East is going to play one of those 3 teams in the finals and beat them, I think it's going to be the New York Knicks.